My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. The painting that we're looking today is called the Martyrdom of the Chilcotin Chiefs by the colony of British Columbia in October 1864. And before I go further, I'd just like to say the Chilcotin, who reside in the interior of British Columbia, get that name from it means Chilcotin means red ochre, which is an iron oxide mineral or minerals. And so they're often known as the people of the Red Ochre River, the Chilcotin River. And so what you see on the screen is a painting. It was done by a man named Sean Swanky. And I think it's fairly well known, and not so much perhaps the painting, the illustration, but the story itself. And I think it's really an interesting example of a false narrative through art. But I'm not saying that anything about it is false. What I'm saying is that there's a very, very big lie of omission. So our story begins with the painting, and it's true. There was a judge almost 2 centuries ago here in British Columbia, Canada. His name was Matthew Begbie. He was nicknamed the Hanging Judge, although he was harder on white Europeans. He hung more of such than he did of an indigenous criminals. But he was a man of law and order, and he did preside in a trial that found the five thieves guilty. The fate that they met, you can see in front of you. And there are a lot of, as you can see, a lot of Native Indigenous people watching. And one thing I've found out about that is they were from a nearby tribe or First Nation called the Carrier people. Got the nickname carriers I've mentioned before because the women were responsible for carrying the bones of their dead husband, the ashes and or bones of their dead husband for a long time after he died as a sign of mourning, as European women and wearing all black to remember their husbands. And then we had the religious ceremony of Sati, S-A-T-I in India, where widows were pushed onto the fire of their husbands when they were being cremated. So anyhow, lots of traditions here. So it's a sad thing, and I don't want in any ways minimize the horror of seeing people hanged. And even though we're a long time from this event, it's upsetting. So I'm not here to say that it was good that these five chiefs were hanged. What I'm wanting to do is to do what the Dalai Lama said once that truth is like a diamond, which has many different sides and facets, and each side or facet is part of the whole truth. So there is more to the story of what happened in the Chilcotin War in 1864 than our politicians and others have let on. And but before we get to that, I just want to say, based on this narrative of a brutal colonial government for no reason, executing, hanging noble indigenous chiefs. Well, again, there's more to the story, but that didn't stop Trudeau, who only talked about this one side, this one facet of the diamond. And what he did November 2nd, 2018, was he wrote it. He for the second time, he had already previously apologized to Chilcotin, but he went for a second time to visit them. And he very theatrically, very performatively, he wrote into into the valley where they live on a black horse. And when he was amongst them, he took a knee and he kissed babies, and he was smudged in a special ceremony. And so the idea was that all Canadians should feel a great sense of remorse, repentance, and he, as our dear leader, was there to genuflect on our behalf.
Last spring, I stood in the House of Commons to recognize the actions past governments committed against your people and to express the Government of Canada's profound regret for this injustice.
Christy Clark, 4 years earlier, did something very similar. She was the premier of, people know her because she appears in the night, late, I can't even remember. I think it's CTV or CBC News as a broadcaster, but she was the premier in British Columbia, and she apologized to the Chilcotin, and she said that the men who took part in Chilcotin War, who were Indigenous, were respected warriors, and she exonerated them on behalf of all of us, not just in British Columbia and Canada, of any crime or wrongdoing.
So, Madam Speaker, I stand here today in this legislature, 150 years later, to say that the province of British Columbia is profoundly sorry for the wrongful arrest, trial, and hanging of the 6 chiefs, and for the many wrongs inflicted by past governments.
And to me, I'm a history teacher, I'm before kids, and I don't think that's right. I think if you're going to tell a story about the Chilcotin War, if there's any value in doing so, because there's little that, that we're all limited in what we can do in a classroom of students, because there's so much content, there's so much information to transmit. So we have to be, of course, selective. But if we were talking about Chilcotin War with students today, I think it's important that you also mention, which students did not do, and Christy Clark did not do, and most institutional leaders, and certainly the people who write school curriculum, and I would say probably every teacher who teaches this, what they do not do is talk about the other side of the story. Again, these other sides of the dime, these other facets. And so to me, Canadian history should not be the theater of the absurd, all about politicians scoring points and others scoring career points by abusing our forebears here in Canada. And so the other side of the story is this, that there was a gold rush that began in 1858. A lot of people know about the gold rush in San Francisco because there's a football team to this day that's called the San Francisco 49ers. So in California, the gold rush was about 10 years earlier, and they came to British Columbia. And that was the impetus for the 2 colonies in British Columbia, because there was one in Vancouver Island joining and becoming a united colony of British Columbia. And then the first governor here was quite a fascinating man by the name of James Douglas, because he was part black, and he married a woman who was Indigenous. So when people work so hard to talk about need to make it British Columbia inclusive, well, I just say to you that it's been inclusive for a long, long time. And in the very beginning, the vast majority of people in the colonies, even in the Fort Langley, were non-European. There were more Indigenous people in the fort known as Fort Langley than there were European traders, because each trader took a wife, and then they were killed as a result in some cases. And the language spoken wasn't English. It was Chinook, which was based on some French and native trade languages. So, and some of the traders weren't European. Some of them were Hawaiian. So British Columbia has always been a very diverse place, and I don't think we need to continue to hit ourselves over at the head saying, "Oh, we're not diverse enough." I think that's absolute nonsense. But the primary role in building the colony, was carried out by people who were from Scotland, and France and England and Ireland and elsewhere. And in no way should we ever diminish their role. So there was a gold rush and people wanted to get up. There's one place in particular called Williams Creek. So if you go up north of Vancouver, all the way up to where where the Salish Sea, a few have different names for it, the Wanda Fuca Strait and so forth. But now people generally call it the Salish Sea, where it goes and then it ends, and then we have where the Vancouver Island pretty much joins with with the mainland. And there was called there's an inlet there, and the inlet called Butte Inlet was really quite far inland, and it was the best and easiest way to get from the sea for all these people who were seeking gold to Williams Creek. And so that's why they were going there. They were trying to make money for themselves, and they're trying to um, strengthen, build, and improve a colony, not just themselves, but to facilitate that, to facilitate the production, the creation of wealth. Um, the colonial government got behind them and said that we need to, of course, build roads from the inlet to the river. And there was a guy who was helping to do that by serving. His name was Timothy Smith, and his role was as a ferryman to help people get across the inlet toward the end of it. And Butte Inlet, and this again was all in 1864. And one day he was visited by some Chilcotin warriors, led by a man named Platt Sasson. And if you look, it's kind of interesting for me because the word assassin is in his name. And that is relevant because he, without cause, and I've gotten from all sorts of different sources, this ferryman who was standing, either standing or sitting by a fire, reports differ, was killed, mutilated, and thrown in the river. And then Klatsassin and his warriors went on a rampage. And early the next morning, they killed 12 road workers, gone, who were in their tent and couldn't escape. They knew what was happening to them because the tents were pulled down on them. And then went on and joined in with other Chilcotin, joined in, and they killed 4 trailblazers. I won't go into detail about all this. One settler who was living by themselves and who long traded with the Chilcotin, 3 drivers of a pack train, meaning whether it be donkeys or horses, but carrying trade goods. And when all this was happening, or certainly after all this was happening, word of course got back to the capital of British Columbia, which for an early time it was in New Westminster, and not in Victoria where it is today. And a posse was sent. Men were called to bear arms, to go and to make people responsible for what taken and protect those who were living in the area who were, of course, obviously very unsafe. And one of them also was killed. So a total of 22 men, none of whom took arms against Chilcotin, were murdered. And afterwards, 5 chiefs were hanged. So you could say it's eye for an eye, although the number 5 doesn't quite equal 22. I don't believe in hanging, but then again, I don't want to be guilty of what they call presentism, this idea of sitting in luxury in 2025 and judging people long ago, almost 200 years ago, in their actions. They figured out that there needed to be frontier justice. If somebody did something wrong, the punishment had to be hard or it would have been repeated. The lesson needed to be taught, and the lesson was taught. And afterwards, there was no more killing of people working on roads. And British Columbia became what it is today, which is a province that's riddled with roads, and provides obviously a very comfortable high standard of living for all of us. So again, the false narrative isn't that the narrative's false because these chiefs were hanged, and I'm not saying all the were responsible. I'm not saying it was right. I'm just simply saying there's a very serious lie of omission. there's another side to the story that needs to be heard as well before students or anyone else comes to his or her own conclusion about the Chilcotin War. Thank you.